Lord Lucan murdered her, having mistaken her for his estranged wife, Lady Veronica Lucan. It would take more than 50 years for modern forensic science to finally pierce the silence surrounding his mysterious disappearance. The legend that once cloaked his name has been torn away to show something far darker than anyone imagined. DNA evidence reportedly confirms what investigators, historians, and the public long suspected, that Lord Lucan may not have died in the immediate aftermath of the horrific crime at his family home, but instead might have lived on, hidden and undetected, following that fateful night in Belgravia. On the night of November 7, 1974, the elegant facade of 46, Lower Belgrave Street in London, a townhouse synonymous with privilege and wealth, concealed a nightmare that would grip Britain for decades. Inside, 29-year-old Sandra Rivet, a devoted nurse and nanny caring for Lucan's children, descended the narrow staircase into the basement kitchen to make a cup of tea, unsuspecting that this ordinary act would position her in the path of a calculated and brutish attack. Without warning, an intruder wielding a lead pipe wrapped in plaster attacked her with terrifying precision. The weapon was crude yet deliberate, and the blows fell before she could defend herself. Meanwhile, upstairs, Lady Veronica Lucan returned home, unwittingly to be confronted with the horror below. Minutes later, she too was attacked, her head bloodied, her hair matted, a look of shock frozen on her face. But instinct drove her to run. Summoning extraordinary courage, she broke free and ran into the cold November night, her screams echoing down Belgravia's cobbled streets and drawing neighbors into a scene of unimaginable terror. In a matter of hours, police had begun to piece together a chilling profile of the attacker. Suspicion focused quickly on Lord Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan. Up until that night, Lucan had been the picture of aristocratic charm, elegant, charismatic, and deeply intertwined with Britain's elite circles. Beneath that polished veneer, though, personal and financial trouble was growing. He was a notorious gambler at the high-stakes games run by the exclusive Claremont Club, living a life of glamour and risk that was quickly falling apart. Investigators believed he had both motive and opportunity to commit the crime, but by the time the authorities moved to arrest him, he had disappeared. The vanishing of a man so ubiquitously known, so well-connected, sent the nation reeling. The case blew up on front pages and television screens as the public struggled to reconcile the sophisticated Earl with the portrait of a murderer. The wealth, the secrecy, the scandal all stoked the fascination. Overnight, Belgravia changed from being a haven of privilege into the epicenter of one of modern Britain's most enduring mysteries. A huge manhunt ensued. Police combed London, watching ports, airports, and railway stations. Tips poured in from all over the globe. Sightings in Hong Kong, Devon, Bombay, even Australia, but each one crumbled into disappointment. As time went on, it became almost an obsession. Detectives, journalists, and amateur sleuths were entangled in false sightings and conflicting accounts, whispers of conspiracy. Some figured Lucan had slipped away with aid from powerful associates within the upper echelons of British society. Others could visualize him as a drifter, taking from place to place with false identities, living the rest of his days in quiet anonymity. By 1999, the courts declared Lucan legally dead, transferring his title and estate to his son, George Bingham. But even that official declaration brought no real closure. Was Lord Lucan really dead, or had he staged the perfect disappearance to avoid justice? The case had grown beyond a murder investigation into something larger, a study of privilege, power, and the lengths one man might go to escape accountability. But behind the gleaming facade of the aristocracy, the Lucans concealed a more sinister reality. Years later, Lady Veronica would speak about how their marriage was a cold, coercive union bolstered by manipulation and fear. In public, Lucan was polished and charming, but in private, he became volatile and menacing. His addiction to gambling enslaved him lavish nights at the Claremont Club, high-stakes baccarat, and wild spending that pressed the family into indebtedness. He had lived a life of glittery appearances, private zoos, European holidays, and grand parties, while his financial and emotional stability crumbled beneath the surface. Lady Lucan described a pattern of psychological intimidation and sudden bursts of violence, designed to maintain control and instill fear. Gracious one moment, he could become, without warning, unpredictable and cruel Their beautiful Georgian townhouse, complete with ornate staircases and curated art, masked not refinement but quiet, suffocating terror. The Lucan home had become a stage where privilege met peril. Amid growing chaos, Sandra Rivet stood out as a steady, compassionate force within the household. Capable, intelligent, and fiercely protective of the children, she offered a rare sense of stability in a home otherwise consumed by volatility. Yet her closeness to the family's turmoil placed her in grave danger. Lady Lucan would later claim that Lord Lucan had carefully orchestrated the brutal attack that took Sandra's life. The Weapon A lead pipe-wrapped in plaster to prevent splintering spoke of premeditation, not impulse. In Lady Lucan's recollections, he was a man of charm laced with menace, violence cloaked in calculation, aware of his actions, yet driven by an unrelenting need for control. Sandra's murder was no crime of passion, but the grim result of domestic collapse, financial strain, and deliberate cruelty. Behind the glamorous facade, however, the Lucan household had become a crucible of fear that would not only result in murder, but would also fire up one of Britain's most haunting mysteries. By 1974, the elegant image of the Lucan marriage had disintegrated. What began as a glittering union of wealth and status had soured into resentment and open hostility. At the center of the dispute were their children. Faced with her husband's increasingly erratic behavior, especially after his mounting gambling losses, Lady Lucan sought full custody. It wasn't just a marital battle. It was a fight for survival. The court sided with her, ruling that struck at the heart of Lord Lucan's pride. As a man raised in privilege and accustomed to control, losing authority over his family was an unbearable humiliation. The battle-hardened Lucan waged a merciless campaign to have the judgment reversed. He painted his wife as unstable and unfit, whispering rumors among London's upper class about her mental health. But the courts were not fooled by a performance. The custody decision did not budge, leaving him bitter, humiliated, and dangerously obsessed. Friends of Lady Lucan would later remember her growing fear, though, as they would admit it wasn't paranoia at all. She reported being followed, watched, and receiving silent, threatening calls. Investigators would later conclude that Lucan was stalking his estranged wife, waiting for the right moment to strike. His motive could not have been clearer: to eliminate Lady Lucan, get his children back, and restore his ruined reputation. What he did not plan for was fate's cruel twist. On the evening of November 7, 1974, Sandra Rivet, the devoted nanny, went into the basement kitchen for tea, unaware that Lucan was allegedly lying in wait. In the dim light, he is believed to have mistaken her for his wife. Veronica was expected home, while Sandra had been called in unexpectedly at the last minute. That small coincidence sealed her fate. The attack was swift and brutal. Sandra was struck down, fatally wounded, an innocent casualty of Lucan's rage. When Lady Lucan returned moments later, she too was attacked but managed to escape, bloodied and terrified, fleeing into the London night to raise the alarm. By the time police arrived, Lucan had vanished. His plan for control ended not in victory, but in blood and disappearance, marking the beginning of one of Britain's greatest unsolved mysteries. Theories about Lord Lucan's fate dominated headlines for decades. Some said he had drowned himself in the English Channel, overcome with guilt. Others thought his debts had caught up with him, that the criminal underworld took revenge. More romantic speculations have him fleeing abroad, protected by powerful friends, an aristocrat shielded by privilege. But in early 2025, everything changed. A modern forensic review reignited the case. Neil Barman, Sandra Rivet's son, revealed that newly examined evidence from the 1970s had produced shocking results. Using modern touch DNA and fingerprint analysis, investigators discovered traces proving that Lucan had not died in 1974, but had lived on undetected for years. The revelation shocked the nation. It wasn't just proof that Lucan had been at the crime scene, it showed he had escaped justice in its entirety, living quietly while the world presumed him dead. Theories of suicide and revenge killings suddenly seemed hollow. One more insidious possibility dawned, that Lucan's wealth and status had looked after him, buying silence and sanctuary. For Sandra Rivet's family, the discovery was bittersweet validation of his guilt, but also the painful realization that for decades he had evaded punishment. The news sent shockwaves through Britain, dismantling half a century of myth. Lucan, once lost a legend, had not vanished into the fog of history. He had hidden in plain sight. If he truly lived past 1974, every comforting story of his demise collapsed into dust. What remained was far more unsettling. That Britain's most infamous fugitive had slipped through society's cracks, living in the shadows while a family of his victim suffered without closure. Now, even as legal experts debated whether justice could still be served, if it was moral or even possible to try a man in his 90s, the truth had already reshaped history. Lord Lucan had not disappeared. He had endured, a ghost of privilege and guilt haunting the edge of the modern world.